It's really wonderful to welcome Willie and Carel back to the podcast. And those of you that have been following us for a bit, Dr. Willie McLeod, some really worthwhile knowledge that he always shares with us, and I really enjoy that. And Carel Smith, that adds those little gems that I really enjoy as well. How are you guys doing? When we touched base before the podcast, you guys were talking about living in paradise. So, how's life in paradise?
Yeah, I just have to quickly jump in there. Willie always makes a strong case that living in the Cape and Western Cape is like living in paradise. So, Willie, maybe
Well,
you
not
can
anywhere.
find your
Anywhere. You should
statement.
live next to the sea, close to the
Oh,
sea, to the beach and everything, and go for a swim each day or so if it's summer.
So,
yeah,
so you're not
interesting
really.
because
I'm
we're
just
going
worried
to
that
read
there's
about the beast coming out of the sea here. So it's not
exactly.
that sea,
That's
eh?
what I wanted to say. You have to be very cautious, eh? Um, so, yeah, and doing well, Willie.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Great stuff. So, today we are going to touch on Revelation 13, and we're actually just going to look at verse 1 to verse 10 because there's so much to cover. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I do have a little group on the side that we sort of meet every second week. And this is something that came up last week, Revelation 13 and the beast out of the sea. So I actually just want to start us off by just reading the first couple of verses. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. A massive amount of information to unpack there. So, Willie, can I sort of get us started off by asking you to unpack, perhaps those first two lines? 10 horns, what does that represent? What does the 10 heads represent and the 10 crowns? And then we can basically take it from there.
Yeah, so I can first of all mention that this is the third time that reference is made to this particular, to the beast. This is what we find, for example, in chapter 11. The beast is also mentioned. For example, verse 7, it's about the 2 witnesses. And then we read about the beast that descends out of the bottomless pit. Clearly the same beast that we're talking about here, even though in this case it's represented as rising from the sea. And then also in chapter 9, we read how he actually, in this passage, it's more clearly described how he arose from the bottomless pit, where he's called the angel of the bottomless pit. And they, we've already talked about this in detail, they had as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek his name is Apollyon, which is basically the destruction or the destroyer. So he's the great destroyer. And so this is the third time actually that he enters the discussion. But now the focus is clearly and most definitely on this beast. Now, what is interesting is the beast is described quite similar to the dragon in the previous chapter 12. The dragon is described, and we've seen that he's described in very, very similar terms than the beast. We also discussed this. I believe we discussed this the previous time. And he also has 7 heads and 10 horns. But whereas he had 7 diadems or crowns on his heads, we read that the beast actually have the different horns there, the crown on each horn. So 10 crowns on the 10 horns. And then the dragon is described as red. And well, the beast is also described as red later on in chapter 17, which we'll also come back to. So the beast are actually continuously referred to in Revelation, but in this particular passage, it is described in great detail. And the fact that we read here that the dragon gives him power and his throne and great authority. So it's quite clear. We've discussed the dragon. We've seen it refers to Satan. It's actually mentioned explicitly that the great dragon is the Satan. So his power is directly originated from Satan. So this is quite a serious thing to say. I think this is probably the only place in the Bible where we have such a clear expression in this regard. You know, there are many different, St. John actually says later on in the epistle, there are many antichrists throughout the ages. Many will arise, would arise, and will still, I believe, some will still rise. But many antichrists. But then there's also this one that he refers to, this final figure. And this is clearly a figure that's described here in chapter 13. It's an exceptional figure, very similar looking, described than the dragon, also these 7 heads and 10 horns. And then directly we read that the dragon gives him his power. So his whole reign will be inspired and made possible by Satan himself. And this is quite a scary idea. And I think the full implication of this really bear on us. This is something quite terrible to think about, that this beast will... But then in his description about him, the words that's used to describe him, for example, he's as if he's a particular person, the things that he will do, we'll come to that. We see later on that he will rule for 42 months. He will blaspheme against God. His name is Tabernacle, those who dwell in heaven. He will make war against the saints, and he will overcome them. He will kill them. And all these things, he will have great authority over every type, tongue, and nation. So he's clearly a kind of a ruler, great and powerful ruler, perhaps more, not really a king, more a kind of dictator, very, very, very powerful figure. I think one can think in terms of the emperors of old, you know, the Roman emperors. August, he was one of the great ones. He was the first emperor, but then also later on Nero was actually also one that was, he had absolute power and he misused his power. That's why he's remembered exactly for this reason, that he had this absolute power, which he actually misused in so many ways. So I think this is the description of a figure similar to these Roman empires, but we've already seen, or I can maybe just mention this again, that the 7 heads later on in chapter 17, we will see that it refers to various kingdoms that has arose or will arise on the world scene, and the 6th one is actually the one that was on the world scene in the time of St. John. So clearly the 7th one, and then the beast, which is himself the 8th, his reign was in the future for St. John. So it's most likely a future ruler that we're talking about. But this is just some very first thoughts and just introductory remarks before we get to more detail.
Yeah, that's a good starting point. So I think my first question would be then is, if we look at the heads, the horns, and the diadems or crowns, what do they represent? I think that's a good starting point. And perhaps Carel or Willie can
make a remark or two. If you just go back, Willie actually took us back to Revelation 12, where this the dragon firstly is introduced to us through this image of a Revelation 12:3, another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on its heads 7 diadems. And then, interesting, if you read verse 17 of chapter 12, it says, the dragon became furious with the woman, which we saw was mostly Israel, and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. So what is happening now seems to be a description of this war unfolding.
Yeah.
The dragon, furious, attacking Israel, attacking the church, standing on the sea shore. And the meaning of the sea seems to be like the nations, the unrest of the nations, and the power, political power rising out of the nations. And then I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, the same as the dragon, with 10 diadems on its horns this time. It seems, Willie, you can correct me, that a horn speaks of power, and oftentimes of leaders or kings. And these crowns or diadems were on the horns this time. So it seems that Satan's power is actually revealed and manifested in the kings on earth, giving them power.
Not everybody, but these ones,
Yeah, certain kings, giving them power. And even this beast we're talking about to be the Antichrist, being a representative of Satan himself, although it will be a man in who he really invests his power to be part of an end time, what shall we call it, kingdom, or it's bigger than a kingdom, a totalitarian ruler. Now, what is interesting, if you look at the beast itself, it seems to be a combination. The description of the beast, it looked like a leopard, verse 2, feet like a bear's, its mouth was like a lion's, and then the 10 horns. If you compare this description with that of Daniel chapter 7, where Daniel described, he was described the world kingdoms, which were to come. I think Babylon was the lion, and the Persians was the bear, and the leopard was the Greeks, and the iron destroying everything was Rome. But this beast is actually a combination of all 4 those beasts described in Daniel.
Yeah.
So the enormous power. And it also said all the people it will reach to all the people and all the nations of the earth. So this is really a totalitarian reign described, unfolding in the end of times. Satan investing himself in this ruler and in some rulers around, the Antichrist. So for me, this seems quite clear that this is the rise of the Antichrist, and a description of his power and influence. And what is quite different is, previously we've read in Revelation that the saints, the followers of Christ, was marked on their foreheads and they were protected. But now the Antichrist has been given power, even to kill the saints. So the war will indeed intensify And once again, this key period is mentioned of his reign, 3.5 years. But that 3.5 years it will be extremely intense. Yeah, that's just the side of the view.
And the fact that they'll even the saints will be killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I first want to go back again to the description that the beast arose from the sea. Carel actually mentioned that, and this is repeated. We actually find the explanation for the sea and the waters in chapter 17. The waters which you see, which you saw actually, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So it seems to me that he must be, he would be a very popular figure. He will be popularly accepted. So worldwide, people will be amazed by his power and what he does, as we also read later on. And he will rise to power through popular demand, if we can put it in that way. So it seems that he will be a popular figure. And just a little bit maybe a thought about the fact that he looks so similar, is described as similar to the dragon. To me, it just seems that there must be some closer connection, between the beast and the dragon. They described so similar, actually very, very similar. And we do actually read that the dragon gives him the authority. So one would think that maybe in some ways an incarnation, maybe of the devil. Another possibility is that maybe it's from a bloodline that is regarded in this way within the circles of the Nephilim. One bloodline is actually viewed in such terms. In my 3rd volume on the Nephilim, it's actually discussed the European history, and up to this day, things in this regard, I actually mentions that there's one particular bloodline that's regarded in this way. So maybe it's from an Nephilim bloodline that he will rise, but this is just speculative, but it's some interesting things to consider as the reason why he is described so similar. And then what Carel actually mentioned is the close connection with the book of Daniel. And Carel, yes, I absolutely agree with you. In Daniel chapter 7, where we read about the 4 beasts that in that case also rose from the sea, described by the prophet Daniel. And then in the 4th beast, chapter 23, in one case we actually read it's a king, but later on we actually find that it's rather a kingdom that's referred to. So the figures are actually maybe a particular king, but it's rather the more definitely the kingdoms that are of importance here. For example, verse 23, and he said, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and he shall devour the whole earth. So this is just trample it and break it in pieces. So this is I agree with you that this is a reference to the Roman Empire, which existed, for example, in its eastern leg until I think about 1565 or something in the Byzantine Empire, and the Roman Empire were divided in 2 in accordance with the 2 legs of this statue, in the case of Daniel 2, in that description, of the very similar things that we're discussing here. But the other part of the kingdom actually continued to exist in the form of the Holy Roman Empire until about 1806. So it's not too long ago, that these things are, that the remnants of the Roman Empire actually existed. And so I do believe that the close relation with the book of Daniel chapter 7 gives the key. And in this book, we read about this 4th this terrible beast that will rise, which is this kingdom. And then on its head are these 10 horns. And it actually says that it's 10 kings who will arise from this kingdom, presumably later on, in later times. And we read exactly the same in Revelation chapter 17, that it refers to 10 kings that will rule together with the beast. So they will be with the beast. And in this case, instead of the beast, we read about another horn that will rise between these other 10 horns, a larger horn. And this other horn is described in exactly the same terms as the beast in Revelation chapter 13. We also read that he will pronounce great words. In my translation is pompous words, pompous words. It's meaning something like
pompous and
grand,
arrogant.
Arrogant, self-important.
Yes.
So, you know, he will lift himself up according to other Bible prophecies. And so I think this is great words about himself. I will blaspheme. But what we also find in Daniel 7 is that he will persecute the saints of the Most High, exactly what we read in Revelation 13. We've already read that. And then we also read that the saints will be given in his hands for a time, times, and half a time. Now, we've already seen that 42 months, and the time, times, and half a time, that's 3.5 years. That refers to exactly the same period. And the words time, the expression a time, times, and half a time actually also appears in the book of Revelation in chapter 11, chapter 12. But in this case, in this chapter, the reference is to 42 months. He will be on the scene for 42 months. So in my mind, there can be absolutely no doubt that this beast corresponds with this horn that's described in Daniel chapter 7 as rising from the fourth kingdom, from the remnants of the Roman kingdom.
Yeah, because Willie and I agree. And I mean, if you look at, you just do a comparison between Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, and you look at the little horn, and next to it you look at the beast from the sea, there's a couple of things that align. Daniel 7 says, and he shall speak great words against the Most High. In Revelation 13, speaking great things and blasphemies.
Yes.
In verse 21 of Daniel 7, it says, and the same horn made war with the saints in Revelation, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints. Daniel 7, verse 25, shall wear out the saints. And in Revelation, it says war with the saints and to overcome them. Then you've got Daniel 7, more stout than his fellows. And in Revelation, power was given him over all kindreds and tongues. And then lastly, they shall be given into his hands, and a time and times, and the dividing of time. And then in Revelation, they refer to the 42 months. So it's very, very prominent, those comparisons.
Actually, you can take it a little bit further, because in chapter 7, it's the one place in the Bible where we actually find this word, the Son of Man, in reference to Jesus Christ, which appears. And he's described here in a marvelous description, Daniel chapter 7. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one that's after the description, that's verse 13. So after he described the different beasts, the 4 beasts, and this last, the fourth kingdom, and then this little horn that will rise, and which will do these things, then he describes and he says, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and the kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. And his dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed. So he is the one that came afterwards, after those And then we also read how these beasts will be judged. And then we read in verse 21, I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and the judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. So the kingdom of the saints that came afterwards, after this beast was judged. And this is exactly the kind of language that we find in the book of Revelation, where Jesus rides out in chapter 19 on the white horse in this great battle. And then in chapter 20, we also have a description of the Messianic kingdom, again, in very, very similar terms to what we read here. So or even these things correspond if the larger context of Revelation is taken into account.
Just a remark about the period of time, 3.5 years. Willie, you mentioned that the beast could probably be a kind of an incarnation of Satan himself. It is interesting to, if you look at this period of time, that it was also about the time of Jesus's ministry on earth.
Exactly.
He was God incarnated. He was God and man. And in that 3 years, he did his whole ministry. It made such an impact still today. But it seems that for some other reason that Satan will also be given that opportunity. It will also be a short period of time. And, where Christ's incarnation and his ministry on earth was such a blessing and brought deliverance, Satan's will be darkness and severe oppression. This beast coming as the antichrist, and the encouraging part is that the Lord will conquer him, but he will even have the power to conquer the saints in that period of time. But the Bible says there we need endurance and faith. Even though we know that it will happen, we still know that we will inherit the kingdom and we will be with the Lord. But the Bible is very clear about this devastating time that will come when the Antichrist will rule.
And you've mentioned this blasphemy previously. He opened verse 6 in Revelation 13. He opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. I think it's quite possible that this refers to the fact that the beast will, he will, in a certain sense, or he will believe himself to be, or will proclaim that he is God himself. And in that sense, it's blasphemous. It's blasphemy. For example, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we read something very, very similar. We read about this. Here it's called the man of sin that will be revealed after the great falling away, which is probably the latter day falling away that's been referred to. But it then says, a man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God and that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, the ancient emperors were actually venerated and worshipped as gods. Some of them, not all of them, but Julius Caesar to some extent during his life, but definitely after his death, was raised and worshipped as a god. And then the first Caesar, August, he was venerated as a great god, or as a god, during his own lifetime. Temples were built for him. Priests were appointed for his worship throughout the kingdom. And most likely, this is what is being referred to here in this case by St. Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and also in Revelation. So I do believe that this blasphemy that's referred to most likely refers to this himself, that he raises himself, exalts himself, as we read here, exalts himself above all that is called God and that is worshipped. So he will be worshipped as God. Everybody will view him as a God. That's why he will be so popularly as accepted his rule. He rose from, if we've already seen, from the sea. It most likely speaks about his popular rule. And for some reason or other, everybody will just worship him as a God. And later on in the next part, we do actually read that he is worshipped. But we'll do that next time. But the false prophet, which is described from the last part of this chapter, from verse 11 to 18, we do read that he actually brings everybody on earth to worship the beast, to worship the image of the beast. So this is exactly what I think what is being referred to by this blasphemy, is that he will be worshipped. Everybody will worship him as God or as a God. And so this, I think this is what's meant here.
Another interesting remark, chapter 13, verse 3 says, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast, and they worshipped the dragon, for he has given authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? Of course, these are words used for God, who is like God. But the interesting thing about this wound, mortal wound, it seems that this antichrist will come and try to copy the real Christ.
Yes, he will die and rise again. Yeah.
His ministry precisely, and to pretend himself to be the true Messiah. And in that way, he will try to convince the world, and he will succeed to convince those who are not, whose names are not written in the book of the Lamb. The whole biggest part of the world will follow him and will believe that he's actually the Messiah.
So this is definitely another aspect that you refer to, is you will not only be worshipped as a God, as you've just mentioned. They actually mentioned, it says here in verse 4, that they will worship the beast, but they will also view him as the Messiah, as the Son of, in a similar sense to which Jesus was regarded as the Son of God. They will also worship him not only as a God, but also as a Messiah. So if it's a Messiah, a false Messiah, then again, the possibility arises that he's in some way viewed as the son of the beast.
Yeah. And of course, people will be misled. And there's a big risk there.
Now one wonders, what is this healing? What is this wound? There must be some kind of a miracle or some kind of healing, or we do not know, but it will convince the people.
Yeah.
So what it says is actually one of the heads had more to be wounded. And I've always thought that in some way it most likely refers to, if the heads refers to kingdoms in the past, 7 heads, so it refers to 7 kingdoms that rose in the past. And so you've already compared it with the prophecy of Daniel and mentioned the different kingdoms. So if the heads refer to the kingdoms, that this actually means that one of the heads which actually had received the mortal wounds and that came to an end will rise again. So this seems to me that it most likely refers to a resurrected Roman Empire. That the Roman Empire will in some way be resurrected, and with the empire, it's quite possible that the beast himself as a figure, as a being, human being, but worshipped as a god, will also maybe die, receive a mortal wound. I'm not sure about this. It's prophecy, and one do not know exactly how it will play out. But I think the possibility, as you've mentioned, are definitely included in this verse.
And Willie, the Roman Church, do you have any comments around that and the Pontifex Maximus?
Yeah, no, this is slightly on a different, there are different views about the Antichrist. Who will the Antichrist be? And there is a grouping among Christians that believes that, that Rome in some way is connected with the Antichrist. But we'll come back to that. We'll discuss that when we do chapter 17, because then Rome is definitely in the picture, and then it's more clear. But for this discussion, I think we should leave it here. I just think that it refers to a very powerful figure, which will do great wonders, as we will see later on. And the whole world will worship him. He will be extremely popular all around the world. And they will maybe regard him as a god, or even as the son of the dragon. That's the son of Lucifer. And in that sense, again, I do think there's, the 3 books that I've written about the Nephilim, following them throughout the ages since Sumerian times. The first book is that early period. The second book is the Mediterranean period. I discussed the Roman emperors. The first one's actually the Julian dynasty. And then this third book, I come to throughout European history to the present time. And I do believe, that whether it's fact or not, is that the question. There is in these circles, there's a belief that they are descended from Lucifer himself. And in that sense, I think we can expect him to be worshipped as the son of Lucifer, in the same way that Jesus was worshipped as the son of, or are still worshipped as the Son of God.
Yeah, and it's almost at this stage where, and I mean, you could probably say this has been happening all through time, but I almost want to say the global plate tectonics are starting to move in a very specific direction, and it's I think a lot of people feel that we're moving towards this specific period in history. So I don't know if you guys have any comments around that, or if you want to risk a comment.
I just think one should be careful, So often we read or hear that somebody says this is the Antichrist or that is the Antichrist, and calling wolf all the time. Then there comes a stage when nobody,
you lose credibility.
Yeah, so I don't think the Antichrist is actually on the scene at the moment, and I don't expect him in the near future, I must say, because the things that's described here, if you go in much more detail into it, there's quite a few things that still has to come into position. That has to, the whole scene and the setting and for example, the new Roman Empire that will rise.
Yeah,
we're definitely not yet there.
Yeah, that's good to know. Carel, you're frowning. Anything to add to that?
No, it is just amazing, how the book of Revelation, how the Lord really describes to us the future, the unfolding of the end times, what we can expect. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's also a little disturbing, but we know that the Lord has called us to give our lives and to be prepared to suffer for him also. But we know that he is the final conqueror and his kingdom will stand forever.
Yeah.
But yeah, these things are disturbing if you really are honest.
Yeah. And you made a very valid point. I mean, sometimes we look at our roles as Christians and we think you become a Christian, it should be all moonshine and roses. But I mean, if you look at Paul, for example, there's an example of someone that he suffered. He knew he was called to suffer, and
all the apostles, all of them,
all of the apostles, yeah,
that suffered. Even John,
yeah.
They all suffered. He didn't die a martyr's death, but they all suffered
Yeah.
seriously.
Yeah.
Part of
Absolutely.
the package.
Part of the package. Yes, absolutely. Any final comments from your side, Willie?
Now, I think this, if you want unpacks this passage, one must come to the conclusion that this is a description of terrible events. If we take it serious, then the dragon giving him his power, and the dragon being worshipped. And we've just read in the previous chapter that it refers to Satan. So Satan will be openly worshipped throughout the world, and this person or antichrist or this figure, he will also be worshipped. So it will be, and we will come next time. We'll come to the next discussion of the false prophet. But there will be great signs and wonders. It will be amazing, the things that will happen during that period. So it's just a description of terrible things that's to arise on the world scene, and the children of God being persecuted. I think this is what the term Great Tribulation, that's what it refers to.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. And again, everybody that's been following us for a while, I just wanted to say thank you. Thanks for the comments and everything else. And please, there's a link to Willie's blog if you wanted to take a peek at that. And I do at some stage, Willie wanted to do a podcast specifically on the books that you were referring to. I think that would be really worthwhile. And please go and have a look on Amazon. I'm very excited about the third one that is coming out as well. I don't know, Willie, did you want to just sort of quickly give us the titles again of the first two?
Yeah, the first one is the Nephilim, Kings of an Epic Age. It's that very, very early period. And the second one is the Nephilim, an Unholy Brood.
Yeah.
They should just, my name under which I write is Willem McLeod.
Yes.
MC Loud, yes.
Yeah. And I'll make sure that we add a link, Amazon link to that as well. And then if
and
there's
the third one will be on the bloodlines. It's Carel bloodlines. The Nephilim,
that's going to be brilliant.
Carel bloodlines.
Yeah. The stuff that I find very interesting. So I'm really excited about that. Yeah.
It's meant to be more popular.
Yeah. The Merovingians and all of that. Perfect. Yeah. And then any other questions, info at the Bible GPS. But thanks again, guys, and enjoy your evening. I'm going to start my day now. So have an awesome Sunday. Thanks, guys.
Blessings.
Thanks.
Bye.